Hello to all of you, and thank you so much for joining us for our very first Early Career Investigators Day. I am Dr. Fatou Jallow. I am a health specialist at the Center for Global Health in the Partners and Dissemination branch, and one of the organizers for today. All right, thank you. And we are really excited for this day. And next slide, please. So our goal for today is to provide an opportunity for you to learn how to develop a career in global cancer research, to really become effective researchers, especially when it comes to initiating and sustaining research collaborations in a global setting, and writing grants. And why is this important to NCI and CGH? Next slide, please. CGH supports NCI's mission to not just advance global cancer research, but also coordinate engagement in global cancer control. And we do this through our core values. One is impact, to promote global cancer research that improves lives by reducing cancer morbidity and mortality. This impactful research should benefit people everywhere, which is our second core value of promoting equity. And lastly is collaboration. Because let's face it, this is a public health crisis and cannot be solved by just one person or one field. We need everyone to be on the table, and we need diverse voices, diverse fields to participate in this. And for those reasons, this is why this is very important to us. Next slide, please. In our most recently published strategic plan, we have laid out plans and goals to get this done. One way to do that is by supporting early career investigators like yourselves to become effective researchers and leaders to increase capacity and make sure the next generation of researchers have the opportunity to fully participate in global cancer research and control. Next slide, please. And just as we're excited for today, we know that you guys are excited as well. We had more than 60% of you register in just the first 3 days. And today we have 140 of you here from 30 different countries, mostly from low and middle income countries. 30% of you are early career researchers, and another 30% are students or trainees. The majority are interested in early global cancer research program development or grant writing. And these are just some statistics, right? We received when we asked you guys some questions in the registration. But we really want to know what you are here for today. So we're gonna do a Mentimeter question. So next slide, please. And this just shows you how to go into Mentimeter. We wanna keep this as engaging as possible. So we'll have a few of these throughout this morning. So first, you can go to Mentimeter, www.mentimeter.com, either on your phone or on your laptop. And there's a code that's gonna pop up in the next screen that you're gonna pop in. And remember that these responses are anonymous, so we won't know who posted them. All right, so what interests you about today's session? We do have some listed options like grant writing, funding opportunities, early career investigator, how to connect with other early career investigators, and also how to develop sustainable research collaborations. So once you get a chance, oh, perfect. It's starting to populate. We'll just give it a little bit of time so everyone, okay, great, there's a timer. Okay, so we see that most of you want to really connect with other early career investigators. So while you're here, take advantage of that. Reach out to each other, not just today, but long-term as well. Also reach out to the speakers. We have their bios online. You can reach out to them via email and ask questions. So next slide, please. So we could not have prepared for today without the assistance of some early career investigators who are part of a broad training grant to develop and strengthen capacity in LMICs. We consulted with them to inform today's agenda. So this is just to say thank you to them and also CGH staff. Next slide. So this is just a brief look at what's to come. We really set it up so that we can encourage discussion and participation from you. We will have a panel discussion and a session on grant writing. We also will have breakout rooms where you can really get to interact with each other. We have some moderators in there and also the speakers as well. And before actually I introduce the next speaker, I do want to let you know that we will have a survey at the very end of this. And let us know how we did or what you guys are looking for, because we do plan to do this again, and it will be really nice for you to inform us on the best way to do this moving forward. So please make sure to fill out that survey. So for our next speaker, I want to introduce you Dr. Sudha Sivaram, who is a program director here at the Research and Training branch and actually leads the training portfolio at the Center for Global Health. Can you take over, please, Sudha?
Thank you, Fatu. We are delighted to welcome everyone from all over the world, really committed to a career in cancer research. In the next few minutes, we will provide a very brief overview of the research training philosophy and note some programs that are available for cancer researchers at the NIH or the National Institutes of Health in general, and specifically at the NCI, the National Cancer Institute. And in the next slide, we are trying to show that research training programs at both the NIH and NCI are designed really to prepare a skilled, creative, and diverse biomedical research workforce of tomorrow. And as we show in this research training pipeline on the top of the slide, there are several programs to support a range of career stages, starting from very early research for individuals still in college and all the way to those past their terminal degrees to support their career development and establishment. And at the bottom of the slide, there is some information about how training is organized within the NCI. The NCI is made up of 30 division offices and centers, and training is supported across both the intramural program and the extramural program. The intramural divisions, Division of Cancer Epidemiology and Genetics, as well as the Center for Cancer Research, they conduct basic clinical and translational research and support several early career scientists, including hundreds of international postdoctoral fellows. The extramural program at NCI refers to the divisions that develop funding opportunities and support research and training outside of the NCI. And some of the centers and divisions listed on the slide in the second box at the bottom of the slide are primarily involved in training and workforce development through a variety of programs. The Center for Global Health, where Fatu and I and other colleagues are participating from today, and which organize the program today, works in coordination with all these offices. And our focus is primarily on building capacity of investigators and institutions, working in low and middle income countries, working with institutions in low and middle income countries. The extramural so what we'd like to do now is to sort of just generally assess and understand the career stage that you're in. And so we have our next Mentimeter question. And you just have 30 seconds for your response. Again, as we have listed on this chat, please go to menti.com and place the code. So we see that several have either not participated in an NIH program, some of you have, and there is interest in becoming familiar with research funding, as well as writing your first grant. So hopefully we'll be able to provide you some tips as you seek that information today. So at the Center for Global Health, our framework for global cancer research training is really, we think of it in 3 pillars: improving global cancer research skills, supporting global cancer investigators, and building global cancer research environments. Under the first pillar, we seek to develop programs that increase access to cancer research training opportunities. Under the second pillar, we are really focused on supporting investigators, both in the extramural and intramural programs within the NCI. And in our third pillar, really, our goal is to support research environments and institutions so that rigorous cancer research can be sustained. And in the next slide, we'd like to share some examples under each of these pillars. For example, in the first pillar of global cancer research skills, we have listed several programs. I'd like to draw your attention to the short-term scientist exchange program, which allows candidates who are seeking research experiences to form collaborations within the NCI intramural program. And these are candidates who are based in institutions in low and middle income countries. The other training institutes listed here are rather topic-based skills development opportunities. And NIH also has several other virtual resources and self-learning opportunities. And as we try to understand these offerings further, we ask for your participation in our next Mentimeter question, where we are trying to understand which of the following NIH research education opportunities that you are aware of. Again, the website is menti.com and the code is 1073050. Okay. So there's a lot of you who are expressing interest in principles and practice of clinical research, also in NIH Summer Institute, certainly implementation science, which is a focus area for our Center for Global Health, behavioral and social science research. All right, we will make a note of that. Moving on to the next slide. And the second pillar is really to support global cancer investigators. This is just a snapshot of the range of programs that are offered at the NCI across all NCI divisions. Fellowships, as you see on the left, are at the pre-doctoral and postdoctoral level, support dissertation research and advanced degree training. The transition award that we have noted are for to support outstanding postdoctoral researchers to complete needed mentor training and transition in a timely manner to an independent career track or equivalent faculty position. And the awards that are shown color-coded, one offered by the NCI and the other 2 in green that are led by the Fogarty International Centers, are something that we will be hearing of a little bit more in the afternoon. But you're welcome to contact us for other questions regarding career development program. And in the next slide, we just wanted to highlight a couple more opportunities. We have recently an opportunity for mentored global oncology research. We will post that link in the chat soon, and also at the next session. We also work with funded grantees of the Fogarty D43 launch program, and D43 is just a name of a funding mechanism where we are allowed to support 1 year, 1 time cancer research projects put forth by candidates in low and middle income countries who are participating in that project. And finally, we have a range of fellowships for both US citizens and US-based scientists who are seeking to work within the NCI intramural and extramural program. So in the next slide, what we'd like to do is to sort of understand what type of early career development opportunities you're aware of. Again, the website is menti.com and the code is 1073050. Okay, that's exciting to note that a majority of you are aware of the K43 Emerging Global Leader Award. We are certainly going to talk about this in the second half. And several of you have heard of the NCI's Clinician Scientist K08, as well as the Fogarty's K01. thank you for sharing this awareness. It helps us really to understand who we are trying to serve in our research training programs. Finally, the third pillar is the global cancer environment, research environments, which are really critical to sustain cancer research. And what you're seeing here is our first broad research training program to build institutional capacity for global cancer research in low and middle income countries. We awarded 4 grants that are shown, collaborative projects between the United States and different institutions, primarily in West and one in East Africa. And we are hoping to make some more awards this year. And as Fatu mentioned, this day was planned with the help of nominees from this project. And so we're really thankful that we have this opportunity to share and discuss today. So in the next slide, really, we'd like to, again, welcome you all. We also want to add a virtual welcome from Mother Nature. On the top left is a picture of the beautiful sakura, or the cherry blossoms that grace us for just a few weeks in March and April in Washington. On the right are the beautiful daffodils in the New York Botanical Gardens. And I'm sure there are natural splendors wherever you are. So we look forward to drawing inspiration from each other, learning together, and really gaining big wins in global cancer control. We have one last Mentimeter question for you to sort of assess your interest in participating in future NIH learning opportunities. Again, the code is 1073050 on menti.com. So we'd like your participation in this last question this morning. And as you do that, it's really my pleasure to introduce our next session chairs. I'll begin with Dr. Asma El-Kanawi. Dr. El-Kanawi is an Egyptian scientist at the Moffitt Cancer Center in Tampa, Florida in the United States, as well as Mansoura University in Egypt. Her research interests focus on studying nutrient availability in cancer and how it affects the therapeutic response to cancer. And unraveling the metabolic interaction between cancer and other cells is clinically important because of the prevalence of metabolic comorbidities amongst Africans. And to ultimately reduce cancer burden, Dr. El-Kanawi's goal is to identify novel preventive strategies and therapeutic targets, which can be implemented in low and middle income countries. And joining her is my dear colleague, Ms. Rima Elibe. She is a Cancer Research and Training Award Fellow at the National Cancer Institute Center for Global Health, and she works in the Research and Training branch. Her fellowship work so far has focused on initiatives related to global cancer research training programs in low and middle income countries. She has a Master of Science in Cancer Chemical Biology from the University of Michigan and a Public Health Master's in Public Health from Johns Hopkins University. And Rima's goal is to serve patients suffering from brain tumor as a physician scientist and to join global efforts in reducing cancer burden. Thank you both, and welcome to everyone again.
Thank you. Thank you, Sodha. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending where you are. We are delighted to welcome the Early Career Investigator Day participant and faculty. In this session, we are going to hear about experiences in initiating and sustaining global research collaborations with focus on skills and competence. Rima and I will start the discussion with our panelists. At the end of our conversation, we will have a question and answer session. Please place your questions in the chat and we'll try to get to as many as possible. Now I'll begin by giving a brief introduction for our speakers. I'll start with Dr. Camille Reagan. Dr. Reagan is a professor of cancer prevention and control at Fox Chase Cancer Center in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, US. Her research focuses on the molecular epidemiology of cancer in the African diaspora. Her many accomplishments include establishing the ECID Consortium in 2006, a research group designed to promote collaboration between cancer researchers who focus on work on the African diaspora. Our next speaker, Dr. Violet Kayamba. Dr. Kayamba is a medical doctor specializing in gastroenterology, as well as a lecturer at the University of Zambia in Lusaka. She is a founding fellow of the East Central and Southern African College of Physicians, and she is the current president of Zambia College of Gastroenterology and Nutrition. Our third speaker, Dr. Jonah Musa, is a professor of OBGYN at the University of Jos in Nigeria. He has over a decade experience in cervical cancer and research and clinical care. He's an adjunct professor in preventive medicine, cancer epidemiology, and prevention at Northwestern University. Is actively collaborating on several ongoing NIH funded research and training program in Nigeria with partner institutions, including Northwestern University. Our fourth speaker, Dr. Wilbrod Mutali, is a faculty member at the University of Zambia School of Public Health. He is also an adjunct associate professor of medicine at Vanderbilt University School of Medicine and the University of North Carolina. Dr. Mutali has over 18 years experience in sub-Saharan African, working as a manager, clinician, and researcher. He worked on a variety of research projects, including the prevention of mother-to-child transmission of HIV. He's also a PI on several NIH grants. Let me start with the question to Dr. Mutali and Dr. Musa. How did you decide to work together on your with your collaborators?
So thank you very much, and thanks for that nice introduction, and thank you for everyone for coming through. So it's quite an interesting question. So when I trained as a doctor, I was really focused on doing clinical work, but it became clear that I needed much more information. So I went and did my PhD. So at the end of the PhD, I didn't know what to do next. So fortunately, at that time, I was connected to the team from Vanderbilt, where Dr. Hamburger Douglas is, and other team members there who were offering a course in grant writing, that is in 2015. So this was running for about 1 month. And so I spent time with them, first of all, to know them personally and also participate in how to write grants. So they already had one grant which was running a D43, and they asked me to take some leadership role, which I accepted. And while I was in the US, we wrote an R21 grant together, and that was successful. So those two successes really led to the ongoing collaboration that we have, because now we had some kind of work we could come together about. So the D43 plus the R21. And so from there now, what I saw was that they really wanted to work with the Zambian team and to find some people who can be trusted to work with in a way that is balanced. So from there, I think we have never looked back. So we have won additional grants, and we have now been growing. I used to be like just an early career. Now I'm in the mid-career, starting now to have some big grants, R21, R01, and D43 grants. And thanks to the collaboration from Vanderbilt, and also I've got another one from UNC. These are growing, but I think the summary to all these things is creating trust between the people in the low-income countries and the people in the high-income countries, and having a common goal. If you can even have one small grant to bring you together, I think that makes people to commit, and also an opportunity to review progress and build on. Over.
Yeah, thank you very much, the coordinators, and also Dr. Mutali. We met in 2019 in Bethesda, if you remember. And going straight to the question, just like Mutali has said, I was trained as a clinician, and after I finished my basic medical education, I had the opportunity to do a formal residency training in OBGYN. And I was working as an OBGYN clinician, taking care of HIV-infected women in the prevention of mother-to-child transmission of HIV. And while working on that, in my medical school, we received sound teaching as a clinician. In postgraduate fellowship training, we received sound teaching to offer clinical care to mothers, particularly in the OBGYN space. But along the line, I started to see opportunities. We were generating a lot of data, but I didn't know how to decipher the information in that data. And I started also noticing that women who have HIV were developing invasive cervical cancer at very early stage. So I started raising questions. And without knowing where this will lead me to, I started to advocate for HIV-infected women to have cervical cancer screening. And we discovered that the incidence, or let me say prevalence rather, at that time, of pre-malignant lesions of the cervix were quite huge among those who are HIV infected compared to those who are HIV negative. And shortly after that, in 2008, we were collaborating with Northwestern University and Harvard because we had the PEPFAR country director, Robert Murphy. So he wrote the first Northwestern University AIDS International Training Research Program, the NUA trip. And that gave me the opportunity to receive training as a Fogarty Fellow. And I received a degree in Master of Science in Clinical Investigation at Northwestern University. So that was the first time I was introduced to scientific investigation, how to even formulate a research hypothesis, conceptualize the research, and answer a particular research question. So at the end of my training, I was able to receive a funding support, we call it ECID grant, from the program. And I expanded my research interest in cervical cancer prevention, looking at the role of high-risk HPV in detecting women with high-grade squamous intraepithelial lesion. And this early endeavor led to a number of publications, which we now collaborated with these mentors who were, for example, why I'm telling this story is that as an OBGYN, I was first mentored by somebody who is an infectious disease clinician. He had no knowledge about OBGYN, and he probably would have shifted my whole interest to something else. But because he was interested in what I wanted to do, he was able to link me to well-known cancer epidemiologists in Northwestern. He found OBGYN clinicians who were interested in the area I had interest for. And through that, I was able to successfully implement this ECID award in Nigeria, publish papers, and that led to the establishment of the Northwestern Jos HIV Malignancy Training Grant, which subsequently allowed me to do a PhD in health services outcome research at the same Northwestern University. And I expanded the collaboration that time with many others. And today, to cut the long story short, we've been able to get funding to study, we have a U54 grant looking at HIV, the epigenomics of HIV-associated cancer in Nigeria, with one additional institution outside of Jos, that is Lagos. And today we've expanded this collaboration to 2 other institutions in Nigeria, 1 other in West Africa, Mali to be specific. And today, if we put our grant portfolio all together, including the recent one that NCI is funding, that is the Infection-Associated Cancer Research Training Program in Mali, and other research grants that I'm collaborating with, I must say that I have every reason to keep focus on my early interest in cervical cancer and allowing the Northwestern Fellows and other research collaborators to work together in order to expand this consortium. And I must say that it is through this collaboration that I was able to apply for a K43 in 2019. That was the first time, and it got funded. So I'm in the third year of the K43, and it has given me great opportunities to improve my skills, competencies in writing grants, and I can see me becoming an independent research investigator in the nearest future. Thank you.
That's great. So I see from both of your contribution that a key aspect is getting the first grant, the R21 in case of Dr. Mutali, and a training program in case of Dr. Musa. And this where you found a partner institution where you can build on that and advance the global health initiative that you are interested in. I will shift the next question. I would like to hear thoughts on the skills and competencies that trainees and researchers need for successful collaboration. May I direct this question to Dr. Reagan and then Dr. Kayamba, then other panelists are welcome to address as well.
Thank you, Dr. Epanawi. It really is a pleasure to have the opportunity to join with this group today. With regard to specific skills and competencies, there are a few. I would say the first key thing is that it's really important that you put together an NIH biosketch and ensure that it's very well written in terms of highlighting your biggest strengths and your qualifications and your contributions to science. And always make sure that that NIH biosketch is up to date because it allows you to be ready when opportunities come up for collaborations or for grant writing if specific calls come out for funding. Another important point I think that as early career investigators, you need to think about is to take as much advantage as possible in participating in training workshops and specific training workshops that I would encourage, which would really help to build those skills needed for successful collaboration. One being manuscript preparation. Publishing is really critical. And so having the ability to really know how to hone in those skills, those writing skills for publications is important, as well for grant writing. And so workshops that are designed to help with writing skills would be very important for your career trajectory. Another is learning how to prepare and manage a research budget. As you begin to think about building your career and begin to think about writing applications for research projects, you also have to learn the finance side of things. You have to know how to think about all of the key pieces that need to be in place in order for your research to be successful, and how do you manage those funds. Another important skill that's really critical is time management. We know that for many investigators, especially those in low resource setting, there are maybe a lot of competing priorities, or perhaps you may be in an institution where teaching is also an important requirement as part of your career. So time management is really important. And so honing in on those types of skills would be very important for your career. And the last thing I would suggest is to really think about learning as much as possible and perhaps looking for training opportunities that will help you to learn how to build effective research teams and how to work efficiently in a team. So certain skills that are really critical for this is listening, learning how to listen well and being present in the moment, communication skills, conflict resolution, developing an action plan, and setting expectations. These are all really critical skills that I think any early career investigator, if you're able to hone in those skills, it will take you a very long way in your career.
Thank you, Dr. Kayamba.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. I think Camille has pretty much touched on the cardinal aspects of this question, and she's explained it very well. I'm just going to add on a few others, and this regarding mentorship. I think getting a mentorship team that's appropriate is very, very important because you have to have mentors who are not only interested in your work, but also interested in your growth, even as an individual. And there has to be some sort of common ground. Like Jonah was talking about, if your mentor interest is too different from yours, it becomes a bit difficult sometimes, because then they'll just be giving you time when they have free time to look at other things. And if that's your main area, then there's a bit of conflict there. But if you have a mentor who's very much interested in what you're doing, it's much easier and for the flow to be smoother, to be much smoother that way. The second point I'll bring out is on your research, on your career plans, your career development. From the onset, I think this is absolutely important. And most of us without much mentorship in low-income countries, at the beginning, we didn't have that kind of guidance, as in what are the career prospects. I think it's very important at the beginning to understand what you want to do. Not everyone has to be a researcher. Not everyone has to do cancer research. Not everyone has to be a clinician. You have to decide in the beginning what you want to do. And once you decide on that, it's much easier to follow that path. Sometimes because we live in societies where resources are very difficult to come by, many of us find ourselves just becoming opportunistic. So wherever there's a grant, you go and sit there. Wherever you see that there's a bit of green pastures, you want to go and find yourself there without actually having your personal plan, as in what you're going to do with your life. There's nothing wrong with that, but the problem is that sometimes when you're a jack of all trades, you're not going to have anything solid to actually use as this is what I've done. At the end of your career, you end up being frustrated because you won't be able to have a good track record of what you'll have done. So being focused, staying focused is a very important aspect. And that's from the beginning. You can't do it alone. You really need guidance from people who've got experience. That's all I'm going to say for now. Thanks.
Thank you. These are great info, and starting from training to mentorship. I will now turn it over, if the other panelists don't have any other contribution, I will turn it over to Irma for the next panel.
I just want to add to what Violet said. In her last comment, she talked about the need for the mentee to remain focused on their career pathway. And it is very critical. So for mentees to remain focused, it means that at the beginning of their career, mentors should try to insist that the mentee should come up with an individualized career development plan. Because what I have seen, there are some that we started this training together and they lost focus, and today, they are not doing research, their career has been diluted. So in lower middle income countries, one of the attributes of a good mentee is to really remain focused, even amidst obstacle, challenges. If you stay focused, at the end of the day, you'll be able to break even, and you will get the best out of the mentoring, collaboration, and establishing a successful research career. So that I just thought I should add to that attribute that she mentioned. And then, of course, mentors must be deliberate. As I mentioned, my first mentor is not in my own discipline, but because they have that understanding of the limitation in LMICs, they continue to encourage and they look out for people who will be able to mentor me very well. And today he is just adding his voice. He's not really my direct mentor right now, but he has been able to provide every opportunities for me to develop my career. Thank you.
Thank
Can
you.
I just add a quick one? Just a quick one. I think I won't take long. Just okay, sorry, there's some feedback. I want just to say that in my experience, so the institutions in the US are very different from our institutions where we work here, and the expectations from our top leadership in the universities where we work, the teaching workload, and then the time that it would require to develop your research. So one of the skills I would encourage our new early careers to think through is just how they navigate the politics, the difficulties, and some of the things that your top leadership might not share, but you have got a vision and you need to share with them. I've been acting almost as I'm young and starting, but I've had to mentor even some of the biggest people in the university, but being able to talk to them, to allow me time to go out, to bring them on board on some of my grants, to understand why I need time, why I need their support, why they need to sign my documents early, why the financial systems must be efficient in order for me to be accountable. So you need to even actually be a teacher yourself, because you are going to be in an institution which is going to be resisting your growth, because they just don't understand what it takes to become like a top researcher, and also to collaborate with people who are checking email every minute and want a response. And you find your university hasn't got even access to emails at all. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll turn it now over to Irma, my colleague Irma, for next questions.
Thank you, Asma, and thank you all of you for the insight that you shared so far. And so we spoke about your collaborations and we spoke about some competencies, but now I wanted to know if we could speak some more about specific behaviors and competencies needed for successful research collaborations. And specifically, we wanted to know about some behaviors and indicators of an equitable collaboration, like what behaviors and indicators make a collaboration equitable. And we can start with Dr. Reagan on this one.
Sure. So I can think of a few. One being be respectful and patient. I think based on some of the comments that we've already, the points that have already been raised, patience is important because as a collaborator, you have to understand your collaborator's setting. You have to understand, the challenges that they may have to deal with, or barriers, or differences in priorities. So being respectful and patient is a very important behavior that I think will really help to increase the opportunity for successful collaboration. Being very sensitive to specific needs. There may be things that some of us in high-income countries take for granted, that investigators in lower middle income countries don't have access to or availability to. And so we have to remain sensitive to specific needs and do as much as possible to help to facilitate some of those needs sometimes. And the last thing I can think of is to be inclusive. We have to, as collaborators, always remember that when we have ideas, as we are developing the relationship and we're developing the collaboration, that it must be inclusive. It's about partnering with each other, and it's about allowing all of the persons involved in the collaborative team to provide the input in developing the idea. So I think those are some of the key behaviors that I think would be very important.
I think I'll just add on a short one there. I think a collaboration has to be very clear. Each member of that collaboration has to know what they want, or what they are bringing to the table, they're bringing to this plate, what ingredients they are putting in that grouping. I think that sometimes you end up with conflict if that understanding is not clear. If you go in a collaboration as a junior faculty, as a junior member, what are you going to bring to the table? don't forget that even the mentors themselves are expecting to get something out of that sort of collaboration. So I think that that has to be very clear, and obviously it's not cast in concrete. It can change as you go along. But if that is clear as you're moving on, it sort of reduces conflicts and is more likely to end up with a successful collaboration. Thanks.
Yeah, I want to quickly add to that, talking about expected behavior for successful collaborations. We also have to be mindful about our upbringing, the training for us in lower middle income countries. Sometimes a lot of mentees from lower middle income countries don't have what we call psychological safety. They don't feel safe to really express themselves to their mentor. There's this cultural barrier for a mentee to really come out upfront and talk about their experience, their feelings, their displeasure in the mentor-mentee relationship. So I think the starting point is that we should train mentees and also our big mentors, as Mutale said, in the universities. They are supposed to be mentors, but they don't really know the attributes of mentorship. So if a mentee that has been trained in the high income country is beginning to express himself, is beginning to insist on certain things he believes in, it may be misconstrued to mean disrespect. So the issue of training for both the mentors and the mentees is very, very critical. And for me, I learned this when I took some elective courses in my research training on team science and collaborative science, and the need for mutual respect, maintaining clear communication, and also creating a psychologically safe environment for interaction between the mentor and mentee. So as we talk about this, ongoing training is really important. I just thought I should add this. Thank you.
Yeah, just a quick one for myself to add to this discussion. I think the issue of understanding different cultures, I don't know where this is taught, but really this comes as implied that you understand the culture in which you want to go and work, either coming from the US, coming to Africa, or leaving Africa, going to the other side. So for example, in America, you have to be assertive, confident, and speak very comfortably and eloquent, and people are very happy to hear such a person. But in our culture, somebody coming too much forthcoming and looking too overconfident when they are young is almost an abomination and disrespectful, and no one is going to give you the attention you need. Actually, they might even start now building roadblocks in order to calm you down and try to discipline you, and now the whole thing is just wayward. And so for the people who are working here, I've had to use a lot of, I'm quite assertive myself, so I've had to learn from my other older mentors how to be quiet when somebody who thinks they're important are talking. You need to recognize that this person requires respect, and you do that, and then when to talk and when not to talk. If you are coming to work in a low-income country coming from America, again, you need to understand the people. For example, if the Zambians say yes, they may not have said yes, actually. They have said no, but because there is no safe space, like Jonah is saying, to say no clearly without feeling that there will be some repercussions, so they wouldn't say no directly, and it's not polite to say no here. And so that kind of understanding to probe your yes, did you really mean, and go outside the meeting to explain and get to the people so that people can tell you. Sometimes they don't say the answers in the meeting. And I think that becomes very hard for people who want to collaborate coming into Africa like this to get, was that a yes? So when they go back to America, they're writing an email, no one is replying. So there should be that understanding. And from our end also, we should also learn that our friends are very frank, they mean what they say, and we should be comfortable with being challenged in the face and responding. So there's also those aspects, learning how the Americans, how the Europeans behave, learning how the Africans and other people also behave and finding some middle ground to tolerate and learn from each other. I think in the end, you start laughing over these things like what happens, the misunderstandings, but these come over time. Over.
Thank you all so much. Those are some really great insights. And it sounds like there's a lot of overlap in what you said in terms of mentoring the mentors and having a psychological safe space and just really understanding cultural differences. Dr. Musa, you talked about mentoring the mentors, and that actually brings us to our next question. We wanted to know if you all would be willing to share about some of your experiences mentoring early career investigators. What are some of the skills that you've needed to be an effective mentor?
Well, thank you. I always describe myself as a mentee, and I've also been opportune to mentor others. And because I have been mentored by great mentors who understand what a good mentor-mentee relationship is, they've been able to train me on how to give good feedback. So, and I'm practicing those skills now. Some of the residents, junior faculty that are working under me, I try to not take over their ideas. Rather, I bring cautionary notes. You know, you are driving on this path. Have you thought about the problems, some of the potholes you may face along this road? Don't you think you can actually detour this way or move this way? And as I give those constructive feedback, rather than giving them negative feedback and telling them, no, this idea you're bringing is useless, it's not gonna work, you know, I try to probe them and use my own experience that, look, I have done this before, these were the mistakes that I made, and these were the great lessons that I learned. So just bringing some of those issues, bringing them on the table has helped some of these mentees to think through the issues, and then they'll go back to the drawing board, and by the time they conceptualize what they have, you find out that they've been able to troubleshoot, identify some of the obstacles, pain areas, and then they reorganize their thoughts. So because of my own mentoring experience, I'm now using those skills to also mentor those that are working and growing their career under me right now. Thank you.
And we have room for maybe just one more response, and then we will move on to discussion of our breakout sessions.
Yeah, just to say that I'm almost afraid to say that I'm a mentor. It has almost happened by just almost happening without me accepting it, because it's comfortable to be like a mentee than to be a mentor yourself, because the standards are very high. And like he has mentioned, the people that have mentored us have been really patient with me, especially coming from a background where you are confused. Like, are you supposed to be assertive, or are you supposed to speak a little less, and things like that, and finding people that understand you, and then they're asking you questions to think. And then our mentorship has been very almost coming with a whip. You haven't done this, this is wrong, what? So I have to actually wash away all that kind of like aggressive behavior by mentors. So I always feel like I'm not qualified, but I think Violet can comment. I think she's been one of my mentees that I've had a chance to mentor. And I think I'm also learning. We have had to have formal training and also to wash away some of our old way of thinking about mentorship and then learning from our mentors. So one of the things is really the listening skills, because we are not trying to replicate ourselves, but we are rather trying to develop individuals in their unique capacity, but also using our experience to build them. So to listen to them, and then, like Musa said, to probe so that they can think on their own. In any case, they want to become independent, not dependent on us. So those skills that build confidence and growth are very important. I'm also still building those things myself. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. And so we did not receive too many questions in the chat from the audience, so please remember to feel free to put your questions in the chat. But now we are going to move on to our breakout sessions. So each of you will be randomly assigned to one of 8 breakout rooms. We have 4 topics for discussion, and those will be introduced to you once you get to the breakout room. Each breakout room will be assigned one of these 4 topics, and there will be a moderator in the room to guide your discussion. The moderators in the room, they will give you more details when you get there. They'll be asking for a volunteer to report out to the larger group, and we look forward to seeing you when you get back. Thanks. Welcome back, everyone. Hopefully you all had some great discussions in your breakout sessions, and we are looking forward to hearing some summaries of what you all discussed. So we'll just go room by room. And again, we're just asking that the reporter from each room try to keep your summaries brief, under a minute or so, just so that we can allow everyone the chance to speak. So we will begin with topic number 1 and room number 1. And that was actually a room that I was in, and our reporter was Nusra. So Nusra, would you be willing to share a very brief summary of what we discussed? And Nusra, I believe you're on mute.
Mute. Yes. Am I fine now? Can you hear me now? Yeah. I said in our room, we briefly looked at a number of questions, and maybe basically the ones I will be looking at is about what were the attempts that we have made at making collaborations, and we noticed that yes, 1 or 2 of us have actually made attempts, and both locally and internationally, and the basic challenge we faced with some of this collaboration has been the fact that the collaboration tends to come with some supremacy or perceived supremacy, which eventually give the other one or both collaborators that feeling that they are not on the same path, and generally or over time this collaboration fizzles out. We also noticed that the institutes or the conferences that have been organized might not necessarily be sufficient to induce or generate collaboration because the timing is quite brief. And lastly, we raised the issue of equity, that the major problem with collaboration is most collaboration have this sense of this feeling of supremacy. As we concluded in our group that collaboration should come with equity, that sense of equity, irrespective of who is above, or in terms of age, in terms of wealth, or in terms of knowledge. They should bring some level of equity into collaboration to aid a very mutual collaboration. I think that's what we had in my group.
Thank you so much, Nusra. So for the other group that had topic 1, and again, topic 1 was identifying collaborations and working in teams in global cancer research, which should be room 5. Would the reporter like to add, only if you have anything that wasn't already covered by Nusra?
Thank you, Arima. Hi, I'm Mishka Kolisira, and I am the reporter for room 5. We had a really engaged discussion around it, largely around the challenges, some of what Nusra mentioned. One of the key additional pieces that was talked about was challenges around funding, and not necessarily just funding in general, but incorporating or taking into consideration local context for funding. So the needs on the ground in a low and middle income country around technology or lab support or access to supplies may be different than in a high income country. And so those types of funding opportunities become difficult, as well as funding opportunities for earlier career investigators who don't have 5 years of project experience or 5 mentees that they've mentored because they're earlier in their career. and also around key mentorship skills, and actually that being an experience where one of our colleagues shared that because of a challenge around having a good mentor has actually dissuaded his research career, but is actually coming back into this now. And one of the areas for recommendations was around proper communication and really making sure that everybody is kept in the loop and communicate effectively around the trainee and mentor and mentee experience. Over to you, Marina.
Thank you, Mishka. Luis, if you are able to hear me, would you be willing to put the slide back up that lists the topics so that the audience can see? So we'll move on to topic 2. And topic 2 is fostering equitable global cancer research collaborations. So that should be room 2 and room 6. Would either of you like to volunteer to go first?
I can go. My name is Emily Weiss. I am the reporter for room 2. So with equitable collaborations, we talked a lot about the importance of understanding that the mutual interests served between high-income countries and low-income countries can be very different, and that it really is the responsibility of high-income countries to take that first step so that, you know, mutual interest might not be the first driver of collaboration, but it's really important that the privileges and resources are recognized by the high-income countries so that they can kind of tone down their own priorities so that the priorities of lower income countries can be realized, and that, you know, people in the local partner can really realize their own power and opportunity. We talked a lot about cultural humility and how important that is, to really be humble, especially if you are the one with the privilege and resources, instead of having that feeling of entitlement, to, you know, really be humble. But also we talked about how mentees can ask for the opportunity to be visible and to take the lead, and it's okay for them as mentees to take some of that space. So it's really such a balance. And we talked a little bit too about that, just the North-South, the global North, global South, equitable space is very important, the collaboration between global North and global South, but also recognizing that equitable collaboration can occur even within your own institution, and that, you know, is there a difference between the mentee and the PI, and that collaboration needs to be equitable as well. So just recognizing both those interactions.
Thank you so much, Emily. Sounds like you guys had a really great discussion. Now for room 6, only if you have anything that they didn't cover in room 2, please.
I'll be reporting for room 6. We also had a nice discussion over the same point. We had the same discussion regarding communication and cultural humility. Apart from that, we also discussed that the goals of the high income and the low middle income countries needs to be aligned so that they can decide upon a project and carry out the collaboration in a much better way. It was also discussed that one needs to remember about the differences in research exposure and various cultural gaps that one may encounter during such collaboration. It was also pointed out that the vast experiences of clinicians in the lower middle income countries who are not so much into research but have a large amount of clinical exposure can be taken into consideration for planning newer projects, and the local need-based projects can be decided upon accordingly. It was also highlighted that such events, that more and more such events which initiate discussion and bring out awareness about various equitable distributions and collaborations between high income and low middle income countries are a welcome, and they will lead to better and increasing number of collaborations. Also, we need to remember about the difference in research attitude, like the research in low middle income countries can be at the lower level versus the high income countries, which was pointed out earlier. before we plan out such collaborations for them to be more equitable. Thank you. That's what I think.
And thank you so much for sharing all of that. We are going to move on to topic 3. Topic 3 should be room 3 and room 7. Would either one of the rooms like to go first? And please remember to try to keep your summaries to about a minute or less so that everyone has the chance to speak.
I'm not sure which room we were in, but I can just jump in. So we talked about some technical and non-technical issues relating to skills and competencies to establish and maintain your career. And some that were brought up had to do with empathy. It's really hard to study cancer. And how do you deal with that as a researcher, and what context you're interacting with your potential study participants and maybe their families. And there might not be enough education about that. Even if you're an oncologist, there are times where you do have that kind of support system for some of the difficult situations you see, especially in resource limited settings, when you're doing research and hoping that care is coming up along with the research. Self-funding, which is something that an American like shakes their head at, like, what are you talking about? But in the African countries where I've worked, many students have to self-fund their masters or their PhDs or their research. And so that is an amazing feat in and of itself that investigators can do that, but that's a totally different element that people in the US are just completely unaware of, and how that works. If it's, finding collaborators or raising money from your families, that is definitely a barrier to being able to succeed, that hopefully can be addressed with forums like this, where you can find more avenues for applying for research. And then finally, one of the technical issues is biostats. And this I've heard for 20 years. It's really difficult even in the States to find a good biostatistician who is excited about your work as you are. I went through 6 of them at UMass for one project because they have their own research, they have their own projects and their own career path. So finding somebody like that is very valuable, but also if there's a possibility of some of these funding mechanisms to continue to support biostats, like in the U54s or D43s, as an immediate short-term solution, but long-term, if there's opportunities to have training programs to encourage people who are good at math to go into biostats within these countries, and also as well mathematical modeling, which we all are very much aware of being important for infectious diseases. I think bioinformatics is kind of leapfrogged over biostats. Those are 2 totally different skill sets. And so I think that's something that could be strengthened, and people were discussing as far as needing to have those collaborators and those expertise to be able to continue their research career.
Thank you, Dr. Moorman. That was very comprehensive, and sounds like you had a great discussion as well. So for the other group that discussed that topic.
Yeah, I'm from room 7. So,
okay.
Yeah, and I'm really happy to continue on what Dr. Moorman just mentioned, because I'm from bioinformatics background, who came now to cancer research through my husband, who is an oncologist. So in our room, we discussed really the importance of having this non-technical skill of communication skills between bioinformaticians and doctors and oncologists in general, or cancer researchers, because communicating those results or aligning the expectations together to see how we can conduct the right research. We also talked about collecting data, even for all parties, having the access to know how people in different countries are collecting their data, because results usually in data science and in bioinformatics heavily depend on the data you get. So when you get good data, you will get good results. And on the other hand, biased data will give you really biased results. So this is very important to be transparent about how you collect the data. And also, I have written here to be always communicating how you get the data and how you explain them, especially for technical people. How do you explain to non-technical people? This is very important as well. And the other thing we mentioned in our room is writing skills and grant writing, everything, like always overcoming the language barriers when we communicate with each other. So that's all what I wanted to talk about. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marwa. And so for the last topic, we are going to talk about supporting career advancement in global cancer research, and that was room 4 and room 8. And please remember to keep your summaries to less than a minute or so, since we are running a bit behind schedule. Thank you.
Hey, good morning. From room 4, we came up with a few different points of things necessary for career advancement. First thing we talked about was mentorship, which is needed to connect sort of day-to-day clinical work to research, and then use that research to help generate funding. We also just talked about the need for funding in general, and especially how sometimes sort of like funders' priorities don't focus as much as like on the preventative cancers that are more prevalent in low and middle income countries, and that can be a barrier to getting funding. We talked about the need for, I guess I'll paraphrase and say stamina. Just research projects can take longer than we expect. So on both sides, it's important to both in high income countries and low and middle income countries be able to commit for a long period to projects. And finally, we talked about communication. So communication sort of between researcher stakeholders is important. Time difference and cultural differences can make that challenging. And sort of one solution we discussed for that was finding collaborators sort of to check things you have written, see how it looks to them, collaborators with a different background. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Sean. And the last group?
So in room 8, we discussed a few things just to add to that. Really the things that we felt are needed to advance a career in global cancer research is first and foremost really buy-in at the leadership level from both institutions, really to create a good foundation of support. The second thing is that, you know, part of the team or a research group needs to have strong training and methodology in order to have a good foundation to do the research. And then for trainees, we really need to have these directed research initiatives like Fogarty and others for people to have specific research experiences. We discussed some of the opportunities for devoting, you know, a time and career to research. And we found that most people felt these opportunities are really institution specific and not country specific. So like institutes of public health tend to be better with devoting full time to research than some of the more clinical places. And some of the other challenges that I think were brought up in our group that were really important is that while these training opportunities like Fogarty for trainees have really increased in recent years, the jump to full funding has been a huge challenge. And finding that really independent funding, it continues to be an issue, and also that the funding is funneled from high income countries to low income countries, you know, limiting the ability to obtain that funding.
Thank you so much, Jenny. You all had just such great discussions. I wish that we had more time to talk in more detail about them. We are going to move on to a 5-minute break, and to make up for the time that we've gone over, we will shave just a little bit of time off of the Q&A for session 2. And so see you all back at 10:40.
Hi, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the second session of the Early Career Investigator Day. My name is Jeff Buckle. I'm a Medical Oncology Fellow and Global Cancer Fellow at UCSF, and I have the honor of chairing this session. The goal of this session is to orient attendees to the NIH Early Career Investigator Awards. We will have presentations from, start off by an introduction to the types of the NIH Early Career Development Awards and brief guidance on developing an application. We'll then hear from 3 scientists who are leading innovative cancer research supported by these awards. And then finally, we'll end this session with remarks from an established investigator whose career in cancer research was propelled by an early career award. We look forward to her insights and guidance. We'll have a moderated discussion at the end of all the presentations. We welcome your questions, but please share them in the chat and we'll get to as many of them as possible at the end of the presentations. Our first speaker will be Dr. Sudha Sivaram, who is a program director at NCI and we've heard from previously.
Thank you, Jeff. So I welcome back everybody. I always find that hearing how people did something is much more interesting than hearing what to do. So I'm going to run through these slides very quickly. In the next slide, we have some general information about what NIH Career Awards are. So these are awards designed to foster the transition of researchers to research independence. So general eligibility is that you should have a doctoral degree. There are some citizenship requirements. They vary because there is a range of career development awards that are available. And so I encourage you to please contact us because we are able to help you and certainly put you in touch with other program directors across the institute, including at Fogarty and at NCI, to help you, answer your questions. Certainly, we talked about this last session, identifying a mentor and a mentoring team is very key. And depending on the early career development award program, there are specific program eligibilities. And here are some alphanumeric codes to describe the awards. These codes are in NIH sort of language of saying whether it's a training award and what the training award is supposed to do. In the next slide, I'm just going to run through the various types. So the first is the Emerging Global Leader Award. This is only targeting scientists residing and working in LMICs and in LMIC institutions. US folks cannot apply. So the goals are really to develop the workforce capacity in low and middle income countries. These provide 3 to 5 years of support for mentored research and career development activities. There is also salary and research costs included. And here are some program requirements. We have Dr. Jonsson from South Africa, who's going to be speaking to us about his experiences in securing a K43. Next slide, we are going to mention the K01, which is the International Research Scientist Development Award. This is open to US citizens and permanent residents who are seeking to develop a career in global oncology. Again, this provides 3 to 5 years of support, and there is salary and research costs included. And here are some program eligibility. The one thing that I draw your attention to is there is a minimum 75% effort requirement, and there is also a requirement that the awardees spent at least 50% of their time over the 3 to 5 years, whatever the period they propose in the country that they are seeking to work in. And the next slide is NCI program, which is the NCI Physician Mentored Clinical Scientist Development Award. And I forgot to mention, so Dr. Matt Painchab, who is a K01 awardee from the previous slide, is going to be sharing his experiences. This one that we are seeing is a Mentored Clinician Scientist Development Award. This is again to provide support and protected time to both postdoctoral and non-tenure junior faculty level clinician scientists and who are interested in mentored cancer research. You can see that there is also a similar number of years, 3 to 5 years, and it provides allowable salary and research costs. Dr. Surbi Grover from the University of Pennsylvania will be talking with us. A special thanks to Surbi because she's dialing in from across the world and it is sort of middle of the night where she is, so thank you. Finally, just some very general grant writing tips. This is more as an orientation. In the next slide, So these are written, these grants, career development grants are written very differently as compared to research grants, which some of you mentioned that you've been involved with, or you may have seen one. A career development award is really investing in the individual so that they can progress in their career. So the reviewers look at the candidate, their plans for career development and goals and objectives, the research plan, and certainly the reviewers also look at the mentors, the co-mentors, and other collaborators very carefully. Finally, the institution environment, which is similar to a research award as well, that is also an important review criteria. The grant itself, as you write it, as we see in the next slide, is a little different than a research grant here. The bulk of the grant focuses on information about the candidate and what their goals are for career development, including their research strategy. And then there are these other sections of the grant that are required with page limits. Again, I'm going to move on to the next slide because we are happy to answer questions as you are thinking of these opportunities. So do contact us. And we are really happy to advise you. Please read the funding opportunity announcement carefully. This is some general best practice. And really, as we have been saying, contact the scientific program person or the program director. And they help you discuss the proposal, which includes your specific aims. It's always helpful to us if you send us a page of specific aims, because the program director is generally the individual who has developed the funding opportunity and has discussed it with the institute leadership. And so they are aware of what is within scope and what is not. And again, please become familiar with NIH resources, which we are highlighting in the next slide. There are two publicly available databases, the NIH Reporter, as well as the NIH World Report. And these are searchable databases. You can put in any search term from, whatever, artificial intelligence, or you could say Peru. So this is searchable by by keywords, and the World Report is certainly searchable by country as well. So we encourage you to take a look at these resources that will help you find collaborators, perhaps mentors, contact them and begin your conversation. I believe that's all we had. And actually the last slide, what we would like to do is to highlight just share these slides, but highlight a currently open opportunity on mentored global oncology research. This program is a supplement program. So the applicants who are eligible to apply are those who already have NCI awards. Dr. James Alero is the program officer. He will be leading a webinar to give you more information. The applications are due May 17th, and please follow this link and attend the webinar that Dr. Alero will lead. And this is another open and upcoming opportunity for mentored global oncology research. And with that, I'll switch it back to you, Jeff. Thank you.
Thanks. So I'd like to introduce our first speaker, who is Dr. Matthew Painchab. So he's an assistant professor in hematology oncology at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. He describes his work as bridging two worlds as a clinician and researcher, treating patients with hematologic malignancies in the US and a partner site in Malawi. His primary research interest is HIV-associated cancers, especially viral-mediated cancers. He lives predominantly in Lilongwe, Malawi, and has a teaching focus at the UNC Project Malawi, which is focused on training domestic and international researchers to work in global oncology. Dr. Painchab, please take it away.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity to share my insights from applying for the International Research Scientist Development Award, KO1. Next slide. Yeah. So first, just a little background on my history in global health. You can move forward. During medical school, I was lucky to be awarded a Fogarty Clinical Research Scholarship from the NIH, which is similar to the current Fulbright Fogarty scholarships that exist. And I worked under Dr. Bob Gilman and William Checkley in Peru. And then move forward. During fellowship, I was lucky to match at the University of North Carolina, forward again, where I worked with keep going forward. Yeah, I worked with Dr. Satish Gopal and the team. As part of my fellowship, I had a Fogarty Research Fellowship in the Long Way, and worked at UNC Project Malawi, as kind of shown up in the corner. You can see our office and the location. And that's where I started to really kind of had decided just prior, during residency, decided to study oncology. And during my time in at UNC and in the Long Way is when I really got interested in HIV-associated cancers. And that's what I've been studying ever since, and been now lucky to be funded under the KO1 International Research Scientist Development Award, which is what I will kind of give you guys some tips and tricks that I picked up from my, from my one time getting this award. But at least what I kind of learned was as I was going through the process. Go forward. Dr. Sivaram, I think, already covered most of this. I just wanted to kind of briefly mention the aspects of the Career Development Awards that are part of the score, and it's not just based on research grant like a lot of other grants are. Next slide. So I've broken this down into kind of 3 tips for 3 different time periods that you might be preparing your grant. So in the early period, so I kind of say you probably start around 3 to 4 months before the grant is due. I think one of the main things is to really start early, because these grants take a lot of iteration, a lot of kind of passing it around to a lot of different people to get feedback, and there's a lot of components to the whole thing. And so, kind of the early bird gets the worm. Start as early as you can, start putting things together and start putting your team together. Next slide. One of the tips that I got when I was starting to do this, which I found to be really useful, and other tips that I've just kind of picked up early on through grant writing workshops and such, is to take care of a lot of kind of the fluff stuff early. So there's a lot of things like that you need to include. Some of it's boilerplate language about the area you're working, or the institutional environment that you work in, where they want to know what kind of resources you're going to have available to you, what kind of infrastructure is available. And a lot of those things you can get done well ahead of, before you even kind of solidify your research project per se. This also includes kind of letters of reference, institutional support letters, things like that, that you can, that might require someone else to finish part of it for you, like to get a signature, etc. So if it comes down to the wire at the last minute, it's not going to necessarily be in your control, and it might cause a problem. So it's good to get these done as early as possible. Next slide. I think another detail that's really, really important early on, and it's kind of, learning from your mentors and your leadership, like the little ducklings, and imprinting on people who have done this before, is like really take a lot of advice from people who have done this before, try to identify your mentorship team. And then a critical component, as we talked about, one of the aspects that you get graded on is your institutional support. And so I think really having some conversations with leadership at your institution to make sure that the current job position you're in will even allow for this to happen. It'll allow you to go, live abroad. It'll allow you to have enough time abroad. And importantly, that you'll be able to have enough institutional support for the dedicated research time that you're going to need if you do end up getting this grant, because you're going to need letters that specifically say that, and you're going to need actual commitment from your department chief, your department chair, or your division chief, or whoever, saying that yes, we're going to allow this person to do this. Next slide. In the more into like the actual kind of fundamentals of the grant and kind of the middle period, when you're really getting into the heart of writing the grant, some tips that I think were really helpful for me were to get examples of previously funded grants. So you may have other people from your institution or from other institutions who have gotten funded before, and to be able to see what their grant looks like, how it was organized, what kind of maybe images or figures they use to try to describe different interconnections between their mentors and their research plan and their training plan. Those kinds of things can be really, really helpful and give you some ideas of what works and what doesn't work. Next slide. I also was like extremely lucky to find like an awesome writing group that included a few peers who were, some were applying for the same grant, some were applying for other K awards, but included a couple of very kind of senior, very experienced grant writers and people who are experienced with global health type grants, and have even, they have experience sitting on the study sections who review these grants, so they know what people are looking for. They know what kinds of things work and what don't work, and it gives you opportunities to pass it around and get a lot of opinions from a lot of people about your ideas and the way you put them together, etc. Next slide. And I think this was like the thing that I really didn't understand before I wrote this grant itself, was the benefit of really, I kind of have the picture of the elephant in the elevator there, because someone told me once, like think of your specific aims as your elevator pitch for your grant. And to really spend a good chunk, like maybe even 2 months to get your specific aims page perfect before you even dive into the body of the rest of the grant. Because the specific aims page is like an elevator pitch for the rest of your grant, and even can kind of give you the opportunity, like I vaguely remember, you have your short introduction section in your specific aims page, and you can actually take that directly, put it into the background of the paper, and expand kind of each sentence from your background, your specific aims becomes a paragraph in your actual bulk part of your grant. And then that allows you to really not lock down, what research project you're going to do, and therefore understand who would be the right mentors for you and what skills do you need to get to be able to do the things you want to do. And that'll allow you to really integrate things, which actually brings us to the next slide, which is then kind of taking that specific aims page and the different aspects, especially thinking about I like to think about the 3 parts of like your mentors, your research plan, and your kind of career development plan or training plan, and try to draw as many links between those 3 things as you can and really integrate them together so that it becomes kind of one coherent whole. Next slide. And then iterate. So as you get into this section, like really just writing, getting feedback, taking that feedback, continuing to write over and over and over between you and your different mentors and even your peers to kind of just really work on getting it as good as possible before the final deadline. Next slide. Oh yeah, this brought up memory of someone taught me when I was getting some grant writing training a couple of years ago about the wine sign. So it's just the thinking about as you're iterating and as you're getting feedback from people. Imagine that many people who are reviewing your grants might be doing it at the end of the day when they're tired, they have a glass of wine in their hand, and you don't want to put any roadblocks in the way, anything confusing or that's unclear, that doesn't make sense, that'll make them put that glass of wine down and like mark your paper or be confused. Okay, next slide. And then finally, when you're getting down to the last little bit, you want to inspect. You want to look, like with eagle eyes, try to find every little maybe typo or anything you might have and correct them. And then I think as a last pass, when you're almost ready to submit the grant, go back to the RFA and look for anything where they make specific comments like your grant should involve local buy-in from institution, and make sure that you like include those words directly in the grant application whenever you can, and kind of underline it and say, yes, I met this checkbox that they wanted me to meet, because that makes it easy for the reviewer to know that then you met the checkbox. And finally, next slide. And that kind of brings it all together, and you can celebrate. And even if you don't get funded, it's an awesome opportunity to really put your ideas together, think about where you want your career to go, think about what skills you want to learn and what you want to do in the future, and you'll learn a lot about the science of what you're working on as well. Next slide. And that's the end. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you so much, Dr. Paintraub. I'd like to invite our next speaker, Dr. Grover. So Dr. Surbi Grover is an assistant professor of radiation oncology and director of global radiation oncology at the University of Pennsylvania within the US. She's also an adjunct senior lecturer at the University of Botswana. Dr. Grover has been working with the Botswana UPenn partnership for over a decade and has been based in Botswana over the past 8 years. In her current role, she sees cancer patients at a public hospital conducting research and teaching. She's currently supported by a KO8 Career Development Award.
Thank you so much for inviting me today. And yes, it's about 2 a.m. in Sydney where I am currently. So excuse me if I mix up my words a little bit. So So I wanted to just, so Matt, that was really great talk, and actually really helped sort of think about the nuts and bolts. I was going to sort of go through my journey, perhaps first in global radiation oncology a little bit, because it is a bit different. It was a bit of a different path in radiation oncology. So next slide. So I actually grew up in India in a small town, which by current context, it's not really a small town, you know, still like several million people in North India. And the roots for my interest in public health were set pretty early. So then my family moved to the US, to New York City, next slide, in about, when I was about in 10th grade. And, you know, during my training in the US, it was becoming more and more clear that public health was the direction that I was going to head in. Radiation oncology really came about while I was working, again, back in India towards the end of medical school, next slide, on the National Rural Health Mission, which is more focused on women's health, maternal child mortality. And during that time, I crossed paths with Umesh Manchetti, who's a radiation oncologist at Tata Memorial, and saw a whole different angle of public health. And he's a radiation oncologist who takes care of primarily women with cervical cancer, and that sort of really drew me. And going back to the US, I ended up training in radiation oncology. But still, at that time, there wasn't that really a model or a path to do global health in radiation oncology. And I have to thank, keep going. This is the hospital in India that I was referring to, and that's Dr. Manchetti. Next. Yeah, so during medical school, I had several mentors along the way in medical school, as well as at other institutions, who really helped me build out a path. And I ended up at Penn for radiation oncology residency, and they really helped me carve out a path for public health training, getting an MPH at Hopkins, which required some maneuvering. And then with the help of Center for Global Health, Ted Trimble, and my chair then, Dr. Steve Hahn, and now current chair, Jim Metz, we figured out the current role for me at the University of Pennsylvania that would involve time in Botswana, initially just for 1 year, and time back at the US, primarily based on the breast and GYN service. And in retrospect, this was only for 1 year. And the plan was that after 1 year, I would be based mostly in the US, but after we got there, as you know, Matt and several others on this call have done, turned out that, you know, the first year is really just getting to know the system and building those relationships, and you're literally just scratching the surface. So keep going. So we ended up in Botswana in 2014, in Southern Africa. Keep going. And initially, like I said, I thought we were just going there for 1 year, and I was quite confused when my husband was already starting to build pizza ovens and, you know, having everybody in the community over, and I was just not sure where this was going, but clearly he knew more than I did. Keep going. So early on, I was fully just integrated into clinical care, you know, sometimes even 7 days a week for certain periods of time. Now, currently, there's other oncologists in country that have trained in the region and have come back, but at that time, for periods of time, there was no one else. So a lot of my work really focused on clinical care, and a lot of the questions I got interested in really came from the clinic and the need and the context there. Let's keep going. I had several mentors in country and at the University of Pennsylvania who really helped me, even during that time, continue to process a lot of what I was doing, as well as really think through how that could be framed and questions that could be answered that could be really helpful. I want to point out Dr. Earl Robertson, who's my current CUGH mentor, and Dr. Doreen Masire, who's a gynecologist in country. And both of them, from two very different perspectives, really helped me, you know, think about how to frame these questions, how to really take this and build it into the next step. And obviously several colleagues in country. Next slide. So in 2015, we saw the need to set up a clinic for GYN patients to coordinate their care better, because having high prevalence of HIV, there was really high burden of cervical cancer, and their care was sort of spread all over the place. And as a result, a lot of patients would get lost, and it wasn't really, evidence concordant care was not consistently delivered. So we set up this new site, which ended up seeing all the patients, new patients, as well as the follow-up patients, and that clinic is still running. But more importantly, this also, not only this became the primary place for all cervical cancer patients, but also became a site for training for cervical cancer patients, and actually also for my research, initially for the parent grant that I was very heavily involved with, the U54, and then eventually my CUGH, which is also based in cervical cancer in Botswana. Continue. So the aims, like Matt mentioned, you have to really think about your aims very, very clearly, and probably for the long, that is the bit that takes the longest. And I think the other bit to really pay attention to early on, which I didn't realize, is actually having a very clear connection with your research aims as well as your training aims. And this training aim component is very specific to the K awards. And part of it has to be what you're really interested in, passionate in building your career. And the other part of it is like the skill sets that you need in order to accomplish those research aims. And it's tricky to dig into it, to really think about what is it that you would want to do post that award, but you really do have to think about that while thinking about these training aims, and then also thinking about how feasibly you can accomplish them in the context that you're working in. Keep going. So I thought I would highlight some of the challenges, because there were a few during this process. I think Matt outlined what to do prior to getting the award really well, so this complements nicely. So I actually initially started with applying for a K23 back in 2017. And all of my application was done while I was in Botswana. So while I had a lot of support and mentorship from folks in the US at the University of Pennsylvania and from other institutions, it was challenging coordinating a lot of the documents, etc., from while being in Botswana. Matt talked about that a little bit, like starting that early and having a very clear sense of everything that you needed, and getting the drafts early, as well as getting some examples. But for me, what happened was I initially applied for a K23 in 2017 and sort of planning around that. But once I got my comments, it turned out that NCI was not part of the K23 anymore, and I had to submit a whole new application to KO8. And that ended up delaying my work significantly. So I applied in 2017, but didn't actually get funded until 2019. So like I mentioned, there was within the application, if you're applying based internationally completely, also thinking about the mentorship plan, which, to be honest, with COVID, things have changed and everybody's much more open to and accepting of international, of remote mentoring. But that was a big issue in my application that constantly came up. And then COVID, not necessarily really for the project itself, because the project is still running, but it actually changed some of the logistics for me quite a bit, because I was away for maternity leave and then got locked where I was in a country that really was locked, that is Australia. So that sort of complicated things for me a bit, especially in terms of the coursework, etc., that needed to be conducted. And then finally, I had a few maternity leaves too during the course of my KO8. And also it's important to note that while on an NIH grant, you cannot be off for more than 3 months a year for any reason, including maternity leave. So that required just some planning and coordination within your institution, as well as the PO. Next slide. But like I said, I think if you have all the right elements in terms of mentorship and support, and you think through all of these strategically, which several people have during COVID, the project will go on, and you will have to sort of edit things as you go and alter things as you go to make it all work. For example, initially my plan was to do all the courses for the KO8, in the US remotely through an institution with visits every 3 months. That hasn't happened for a couple of years during COVID, and we've been able to do that differently with an HPV institute in Australia. So keep going. I think we're almost out of time. So now, as the borders open, we're heading back, and I'm looking forward to wrapping up the project. The pizza oven's still there. So any of you in the region or from the US or planning to visit, doors are open. Keep going. So finally, just it's a really interesting and fun journey. And if research in global health is what you're really passionate about, the KO8 path or the K path is really the right one. Picking your right mentorship team, predicting and kind of having a plan for challenges that come along the way will serve you well, but just know that there's still going to be curveballs that come your way that you won't have answers to right away. But as long as you have a good team around you and the right folks, nothing is impossible. Keep going. And I want to just thank just quickly all the mentors and collaborators all around who've gotten me so far and made this possible. I think I'll end here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Grover. I'd like to introduce our next speaker, who's Dr. Jonsson Moodley. He's an epidemiologist and co-director of the Gastrointestinal Cancer Research Group at the University of KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa. He holds a US NIH K43 Emerging Global Leader Award. His research focuses on the epidemiologic aspects of colorectal cancer in KwaZulu-Natal province, South Africa. Take it away, Dr. Moodley.
Thanks. I don't seem to see my slides on the screen. Okay, I see them now. Thanks everyone for having me. I'm here to just give a brief overview of my experiences with the K43 award. I've just been awarded successful with this award last year, and so I've just been a K43 Emerging Global Fellow for around about 6 months now. And so I'll just be, as I said, presenting just a few highlights and some of the important steps in my journey. Advance. Okay. So essentially, I'm an epidemiologist and public health researcher, as well as an NIH K43 awardee through the Fogarty International Center and the NCI. I'm based at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, which is on the east coast of South Africa. It's indicated by that little red star that you see on the map of Africa. I'm a senior lecturer at the institution, and I have a special research interest in gastrointestinal cancers with a particular focus in colorectal cancer. Advance. One slide back, please. Okay, so this slide just shows my journey thus far and my road to being successful with a K43 application. I first started research in 2004 when I completed my BS degree in biomedical sciences. I then moved to the lab and I did a laboratory science degree in 2008. At the same time, I gained interest in clinical research, and I began working as a clinical research assistant on perioperative and surgical studies at hospitals in South Africa. In 2012, I then commenced a PhD in clinical epidemiology, focusing on perioperative outcomes in surgical patients. I completed this PhD in 2012 and commenced the first of 2 postdocs, which I completed in 2018. At the same time, I also completed an MPH degree. So in 2019, I then became a senior lecturer at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, and I was able to prepare and submit my K43 application in 2020. And last year, in July, I was notified that I was successful with this application. So what you'll notice is that I've had a very long journey. I've had 2 postdocs and extensive time doing research, but I believe that that's actually empowered me to apply for this grant, and it's actually helped me submit a very competitive application. So while you don't need to have the same level of experience as myself, engaging in research activities and trying to strengthen your research outputs is an important aspect of this award and trying to apply for this award. And next slide, please. So I've just listed a few considerations, points that were important to me when I was applying for this award. The first thing I think, as Dr. Sivaram has mentioned before, is that reading the guidance that's available on the NIH websites is crucial, just to make sure that you follow the instructions and make sure that you are actually eligible for a particular award, such as the K43 award. It can realistically take about a year to draft a competitive application. And ideally, as I've mentioned, you should have a few publications in the field that you would like to pursue as your research for the K43 award. And so this not only shows your competency as a researcher, but also helps you generate the preliminary data that you would then include in your application to support your research going forward in the award. Again, I can't stress this enough. Take every opportunity to build your research portfolio and to publish as much as you can within the specific area of interest that you have. And to also plan your K43 research around an important public health problem in your country. So that would, of course, then involve you perhaps reaching out to public health officials and institutions, academic institutions in your country, just to gauge what problems are and where the need lies. And then lastly on this slide, it's a good idea to discuss your planned research with senior researchers at your proposed host institution in your country. And if it's multidisciplinary research, just to make sure that you have the appropriate specialists on board to also take a look at the application and advise you on your methodologies that you wish to conduct as part of your research. Next slide, please. So you will need a local mentor in your country and a US mentor for the application. You also will require a scientific advisory committee comprised of 3 to 5 experienced scientists. Now, the scientific advisory committee can be a mix of individuals from an institution in your home country and also researchers from the US. But as long as they are adding some sort of value to your research in terms of the advice that they will be giving. So as an example, my research involves machine learning, and by training, I'm an epidemiologist. And so I don't have very little computer programming experience. And so I've had to include a computer scientist on my scientific advisory committee to assist with guiding the research process, all right? Once you identify a local mentor at your institution where you will be based, you need to also try and figure out if they have existing networks with US institutions that you can leverage for the application. So for instance, if your proposed mentor in your country is already has research linkages with professors or researchers in the United States, then you can actually leverage those networks and try and include these individuals as mentors or on the scientific advisory committee for your project. It's very difficult to, I would say, cold call professors from the US and ask them if they would be interested in mentoring you. So another option is that you could try to network during conferences. But I mean, at the moment, that may not be possible. But just to be persistent in your attempts to reach out to scientists and researchers from the US, because that's an important component of the K43 award, is that there has to be a mentor from the US, and it also helps if you have members of the scientific advisory committee from the US as well. You should discuss your research ideas with your mentors and scientific advisory committee by having regular meetings. Remember, it may take a while for you to actually kind of finalize your specific aims and which direction you want the research to go in. And so it's good to always be on track, and having regular meetings and deadlines is key to that. The K43 award also includes a training component. And so you would need to ensure that you identify gaps in your skill set that you would need to address or improve upon in order to facilitate your scientific independence and to conduct your research going forward. As an example, I mentioned that I'm an epidemiologist with limited experience in machine learning, and my project involves using machine learning to develop a risk stratification model to identify patients who are more likely to default on oncology treatment. So that will then involve me taking courses in machine learning and undergoing applied training in machine learning as well. So when we refer to training, you know, there's a didactic training component, which is essentially taking the courses, and there is an applied training component, which is putting what you've learned from those courses into practice. Okay. Next slide, please. So this was very difficult for me in terms of finding examples of K43 awards that I could read and figure what was required under the different sections of the application. I actually gained a lot of information and was guided by other K awards, other successful K awards, which I found on Google search. So maybe a K01 or K08. It's important that you break your application up into sections and you work on the specific aims first, and then the research strategy and other sections. It's important that you constantly chip away at writing up the application and not leaving everything until the last moment. Also, don't forget that there are other administrative sections of the application which have to be compiled, and that includes things like biosketches, letters of support, your budget, and other documents, as well as local institutional approvals. And so that will also need to take some priority in your workflow as well, because these processes do take time, particularly getting local institutional approvals can take maybe 2 weeks, and so you need to be on top of that. so you actually make your deadlines. I would also advise you to start uploading the various sections of your application on the assist system well in advance of the deadline. It's a very time-consuming process, and as I said, you just don't want to leave everything to the last moment and spending 16 hours a day in a day uploading and trying to upload sections on the system. Again, what we need to remember is that approvals getting approvals on time is key to ensuring that you can submit your application before the deadline. Although the IRB or Ethics Committee approvals are not necessarily required at the time of your approval, if you are successful with your application, they will be required. And just in time, a notification will be sent requesting these documents. So I would also advise that you start the IRB process early at your institution. And some countries have various levels of IRB approval. So that means that you would perhaps have to get institutional approval. So for instance, the university that you're based at, you'll also need to get facility approval, the hospital that you want to do your research at, and also provincial approval or state approval. And so that process could possibly take 2 to 3 months, okay? I think mine took about 3 months to get approval for my study. Can we have the next slide, please? So once the review group meeting is concluded and you have your summary statement, you should read it very carefully and discuss the contents of the summary statement with your mentors, as well as the scientific advisory committee. And so they will advise you on how you should proceed going forward. Also, discuss the summary statement with your program officer as well. And they should be able to give you perhaps some additional inclination of whether it could be funded in another program or as part of another mechanism. If your application is not funded, don't be discouraged. You can always use the review comments to improve the application and resubmit when the next call for applications is put out. Sometimes it takes 2 applications or 3 applications to be successful. Of course, if your application is successful, you just need to make sure that you work very quickly to submit the just-in-time documents and try to expedite your ethics approval, as well as your other institutional documents that may be required, such as opening up a cost center to receive your funds and getting the relevant letters and contracts signed by your institution, okay? And if you delay that, then of course that means you will be delayed with the commencement of your research, and that may be undesirable going forward, and may have an impact on you completing your milestones in terms of your research plan on time. Next slide. Okay, so this is just the last slide. Thank you all, and I also give special thanks to my mentors, Dr. Shilen Chedi, who's taken over from my initial mentor, Professor Madiba, who unfortunately passed away just as I was awarded the K43 fellowship. Dr. Kiran from Columbia University and Dr. Nugent from Columbia University as well. And then the members of my scientific advisory committee who are currently providing me with all the support and the necessary guidance with regards to my methodologies and research as well. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Dr. Moodley, for that wonderful presentation. I'd like to introduce the next speaker, Dr. Ann Moorman. Dr. Moorman is a professor of medicine in the Division of Infectious Diseases and Immunology, Department of Medicine at the University of Massachusetts Chan Medical School within the US. She's been a visiting scientist at Kenya Medical Research Institute in Kisumu, Kenya, since 1999. Has been leading NIH-funded research on Burkitt's lymphoma in Kenya over the past 20 years. She's received a number of accolades for her research and mentorship and is currently the chair of the Young Investigators Award Committee for the American Society of Tropical Medicine and Hygiene. On a personal note, I'm proud to say that she was a mentor of mine at my days at UMass and has continued to support my career. Great to see her talk today.
Thank you. Next slide, please. So I'm glad that I get to be the last one. You've heard a lot of the same topic, so I'm going to just highlight things that maybe have not been brought up yet, as far as getting started and keeping your momentum going. So finding a good grant idea, it sounds so easy. Everybody has good grant ideas. So how, going into that, how do you do some of these things on these checklists? Making time to read the literature. When I got my K award about 20 years ago, there were no e-journals. We did have like a VSAT link in Kenya so we could get online, but things are a lot easier as far as open access journals. And if you can't get access to them, you can at least see that they're published and you can ask your collaborators to send you the PDF so you can read them. So how do you organize your literature review? That's something that you need to figure out as far as why you're reading these papers. Is it methods? Is it their findings? Because this all goes into the background of your grant, as well as figuring out at the end of those papers, what has yet to be done. So often at the last paragraph of the publication is telling you what future directions, the limitations of the study, and that's really fodder for new ideas and what your grant should be about. I found attending conferences was really helpful, the smaller ones. There are many, many travel awards for LMIC investigators. And so don't be afraid to apply for those, submitting an abstract of something you've done. As the chair of the Young Investigator Award Committee at ASTMH, there's a separate travel award as well. So I know that a lot of ASCO ASH, they have travel awards. So that should be something on your radar as well. But that's a place where you can find out what's new, what don't we know. You can meet people to collaborate with, things like that. So it goes into my third point, which you've heard a lot about, is consulting with your mentors, find more mentors. This helps hone your research ideas. You can have different mentors at different stages of your career for different things. So these are people that are there to help you. And they can help you in different areas. So it's really up to you who your mentors are, not up to anybody else. And as you've heard, don't be afraid to call the people at the NIH. They're all wonderful. They want to help you get funded. They want to help you navigate the system. So the SROs and POs are really, really helpful to contact them. And then you can present your research to your colleagues. So you've heard about having them read your written proposals, but also if you're developing ideas or if you didn't get funded and you have your summary statement, make your own presentation. Invite people at your institution and elsewhere to come and hear your ideas and give you some constructive criticism in a friendly environment. The other thing is to get examples of unfunded grants and the summary statements. What was missing in those? Those are equally as important as the funded ones, because sometimes if you don't see where the holes are, you don't know how to fill them in your own application. So those are definitely a great learning tool. And those of us who have been rejected many, many times in funding are very happy to share those kinds of grants. And sometimes it's the study section, sometimes it's the wrong time for your idea. Other times they're very fixable things that you can do to be able to improve your application. I'm glad to see that most people think it takes at least 3 months, if not longer, to really pull a grant together. But don't submit a grant that's not ready. Study sections do not like that. You get triaged, you waste time. You don't get, you do get a summary statement, even if you submit a grant that is not discussed. But if your grant is really not ready, those comments are not going to be helpful. So this involves being well organized, again, asking mentors for examples, figuring out the best means of the communication that works for you. If it's through Zoom, if it's in-person meetings, if it's phone calls, If it's organizing things online, what helps you stay organized is really up to you to figure out. And then one thing that does bog people down are budgets, which maybe you'll hear more about. I was blessed with having an amazing grants administrator when I started out at Case Western Reserve University. They've been doing global health for decades. They got it. They knew how to do it. When I moved to UMass, a line item on my grant was a Toyota Land Cruiser, because it's really hard to get around in developing countries. You need to have a reliable source of transport. You're transporting samples, you're transporting staff. You want to have a driver who's safe. You can't take public transport and have a bunch of blood samples that you're bringing to the lab. So UMass had a little bit of a problem with that, trying to figure out how they could buy a vehicle in a foreign country when UMass as a state institution self-insures any vehicles that are bought through the university. So we worked it out, but it took about 8 months. So you need help with trying to figure some of these things out internally to your institution, as well as just submitting a grant to begin with. How do you know how much things cost? How do you know how much effort should be on a grant? And so your mentors can help, but also your financial administrators. If your department doesn't have one, borrow one from another department, from your mentor's department, your collaborator's department, until you figure out how to write budgets. You've heard enough about how the science is very small part of the application, and there's all these other fluff documents. I completely agree with Matt. Get those out of the way so your brain is clear to think about the science, because all that stuff is just static. You know, the bio sketches, a letter of support, all that stuff. And often your institution wants to look at the budget. They don't really care about the science. They just want to see what are you getting your institution into as far as this, this grant and these collaborations. Next slide, please. So this is a time where you're getting to know yourself. This goes on for the rest of your life. What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? What are your, what opportunities do you seize? And what challenges do you either rise to or shy away from? So you need to identify where you yourself need help in this regard. And thinking about things that people have talked about. What do you have control over in this process? Being a researcher, being a scientist, what don't you have control over? What are the other demands on your time? And then who can help you with those demands? Clinicians have a hard time because often their time is not dictated by them. PhD scientists, we have it a little bit easier, except for teaching load. So you need to figure out how to balance those competing priorities within your career. But this is where you really kind of do that self-introspection and figure out where you have your weaknesses and where you're going to need help to be able to pull off a grant application as well as implementing a grant. Next slide, please. So how do you keep going once you get funded? Well, first of all, if you submit a grant, you should celebrate, like people have talked about. If you get triaged, go out with your friends, commiserate, talk about it. It's nothing to be ashamed of. Everyone has grants that do not get funded. Just, it's part of the process, live with it, pick yourself up, move on. You have a chance to resubmit a grant and look at those comments and revise it. And so you want to be able to get enough feedback to be able to have a really strong application. Once you actually get funded and get that notice of award, there's this feeling of panic, like, oh no, now I really need to do all of these ideas that I just put on paper. And the US government is giving me money to do that. And so going back to some of those things that helped you get the grant, as far as time management, setting short-term and long-term goals for yourself. What's going to keep you productive? What manuscripts are you planning? What meetings are you going to go to? When are those abstracts due? And then what are going to be your next generation of ideas? And again, ask for help from your administrators because you're really running kind of a small business now with your team. Who to hire is something that's very challenging. You want to have people on your team who are productive, but you also want to be able to let people go if they're not helping you move towards your career goals, which can be really challenging. So there can be seminars you can go to or other advice for how to be a boss, because most of us learn how to do science, how to be clinicians, but how to be a boss is something that's really different that you don't really expect when you finally get your first grant. I mentioned short-term, long-term goals. Revisit these annually. They change. It's okay if they change. Nurturing your ongoing and new collaborations, team building. Like I said, sometimes collaborators are good for one portion of a grant, but then you move on into a different direction. And there's nothing wrong with changing your collaborations to follow the science. Don't volunteer too soon to be on too many committees. This happens with junior faculty at US institutions. Also in African institutions, I've lost a few really good scientists in Kenya to academia getting loaded with teaching, so they couldn't do their research. And it was very hard for them to negotiate out of that. And don't spread yourself too thin. How to say yes while saying not yet. So this is like, when does a yes really mean a yes versus when does a yes mean, okay, maybe later. Okay, I have 2 more quick slides. Next slide, please. So thinking about where do you need to be the most productive is part of global health, because you're going from one country to the other. There's African scientists who can come and do training in the US and back and forth. And so what segment makes you productive in keeping those short-term goals in mind with the long-term career goal in mind? I have my little sample shipments back and forth because that's what we deal with. So all of the people at Customs in Boston know me very well. Next slide, please. And finding the right life-work balance for you. So I have 3 kids who you can see when they started coming to Kenya in early 2000. And my husband is also a researcher. He would make cameo appearances in Kenya in between his MD, PhD, fellowship, residency, and all that. And they love going with us and being where we are. So your family will be fine. Bring them with you to America, to your foreign sites. It really enriches their life and enriches yours and enriches the lives of your collaborators as well. Next slide, please. Oops, there's one more little. Can you click again? I think, oh, something didn't come up. Oh, go back one. No, to the last slide, sorry. There's supposed to be some other words there. So global oncology, making a difference in their lives and yours. So it really is an enriching experience. And part of it is the fun of meeting everyone from around the world when you do global health, as well as the people who are in your studies. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Dr. Moorman. We'll now get to the question and answer session. I'd like to introduce Dr. Nasrin Zahir and Dr. Christine Jessup, who will moderate the discussion. Dr. Nasrin Zahir is the chief of the Cancer Training Branch at the Center for Cancer Training at NCI. The Cancer Training Branch houses all the domestic training programs supported by the NCI. And then Dr. Christine Jessup is program director at the Fogarty International Center. Dr. Jessup leads several research and training programs and is the scientific contact for 2 international career development programs discussed earlier that focus on supporting careers of US scientists and scientists from low and middle income countries. Please take it away.
Thank you. Hello and good day, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. We're here to moderate the questions. I did notice a couple of questions in the chat, and we can get started from there. We have about maybe 10 minutes to have a brief discussion about this session. There was a question from Arinma Alibe about she actually had a question for speakers of both session 1 and session 2, for those who are still here. Is there anything else that hasn't been touched on that you think early career investigators should know when seeking to get started in global cancer research? Or any final thoughts you'd like to share with the audience? And so maybe we could start with Dr. Moodley.
I would say the first thing which is important is that you build network with more experienced researchers in the US and Europe and learn from these individuals. So taking time to make these networks.
I'm having trouble hearing the audio. I don't know if that's just me or.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Thank you.
Sorry, I think I was too far away from the screen. So essentially what I mentioned was that, making connections with more experienced researchers in the US and Europe and learning from these individuals and just absorbing what they have to share and the knowledge that they have to share is very important. And that should be done at an early stage in your kind of quest to become an independent researcher. And as you've seen with, with the K43 award application process, you do need a lot of support from experienced researchers in the US as well in order to apply for this.
Thank you. Dr. Grover, did you want to add?
Yeah, actually, there's a couple of questions that came in the private chat regarding this as well. So one thing is that I think it's not clear to folks that the KO8 can be an international award. And I think I was one of the first ones that were primarily based in Botswana. So that is possible. And since me now, I know there's another person who gotten scored really well and would likely get funded. So it is possible. It just needs some coordination with your chair. So your chair has to be really supportive, obviously, because they have to commit 75% of your time and effort on this project. So buy-in from them early and knowing your institutional environment, if that's going to be feasible, because even in certain rad-onc departments, they don't want that, right? Because they have to make up the salary gap or whatever the norm is in that institution. So it's not always feasible. So knowing that and basically ending up in a department that will facilitate that when you're looking for jobs is quite helpful and should be done very early.
Dr. Moorman or Pengchap, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to bring up competition. I had the privilege of being able to work at Case Western for 10 years while I was starting out, and I had kind of the protection of this critical mass of investigators who did global health research around the world, mostly in infectious diseases, not cancer, but that provided me a little bit of a buffer zone from all the competition because our grants are set up to inherently be competitive. And so having that 10 years of having people in my corner cheering me on, helping me was really helpful before I really became independent. Then it was time to kind of leave the nest and come to UMass. But I was ready because I had my first R01, was able to stand on my own, had developed a reputation and collaborations in endemic Burkitt's lymphoma around Africa, not just in Kenya. And then I was able to, kind of do it on my own. But your environment is really important, and different stages of your environment are important as well. So just think about, how you're positioning yourself to be able to be in this competitive field of cancer research. And don't be afraid to be on a team with people. You can still be independent and shine even when you're with a bunch of, esteemed advisors.
I'd like to ask a question to each of the speakers about the role of the institution in supporting you in both your application process and in managing your grant subsequently. Two of you are at US institutions, but living full-time internationally, and then Dr. Moodley is applying from a South African institution for the K43. Can you touch on the administrative capabilities at the institution and then the support of your institution and mentors for the international work?
Yeah, I can comment on that from my standpoint. I think that's something that certainly when I was first applying for grants, I didn't kind of realize all the different aspects of the grant that go into it and all the paperwork and the budgets and all of that. And that coming from an institution like the University of North Carolina, where we do have a lot of, we have our cancer center with all the administrative support, it really was like extremely helpful because they basically gave me a checklist. Like, these are they go through the RFA, these are the documents you need, this is when you should have them in by. And I think that is one thing that certainly becomes a much larger barrier for people who are applying, from like people that I'm mentoring here in Lilongwe, for example, to try to do different kinds of grants. There's really nobody like that. And so you're kind of on your own while you're trying to either like do your PhD work or you're trying to work as a clinician and still apply for grants at the same time. Like, that is definitely an area that that leads to, I think, some significant barriers to grant applications from some of the people I work with here. Yeah.
Grover, any comment?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think it's a lot easier. There's a very focused, now there's even a focused BA because there's so many international projects that, myself and some of the other folks at the institution are involved in that are just focusing on international projects, and they know exactly all the documents, and give us a checklist as well as the timelines. And that does not exist that does not exist at the University of Botswana, but it also doesn't exist actually at a lot of other smaller US institutions. So we actually end up helping each other out. So I have a collaborator in Botswana who's from another US institution, and she was applying for a KO8 last year. And also like in a similar international project will be 100% based in Botswana. She's a gynecologist. I basically pulled out my checklist and handed that to her. And I was like, just cross-check with the current RFA. So in addition to sharing the grant templates as well, there's also sharing of some of these other regulatory documents and checklists. That's actually quite helpful. And again, you just have to find your people, your team around you of mentors, colleagues, collaborators. These colleagues will eventually become your collaborators who are competitors right now might be competitors with your KO8, but eventually these are the folks who are working in the global space, and this is your already set group of people who'll be eventually your collaborators. So that's the only input I would have on that. I think applying for the grant while I was in Botswana was a little bit challenging because of the time difference and sharing the documents back and forth. And the BA pen would be like, give me in this format and shrink it into these number of papers, and trying to do that at the hours that she needed. And that was interesting. But again, if you plan ahead and not doing it at the last minute, the last hour usually works.
Dr. Moodley, I'm interested in hearing your experience applying to the NIH and the administrative requirements and all of these things.
Yeah, I think I was lucky enough to actually have several years experience in managing NIH grants. So we've had researchers from our institution who've been successful with grants from NIAID, etc., and National Institute of Mental Health as well. So we've got a pretty seasoned grants office, and they were able to provide a lot of guidance and advice to me, particularly as this is the first sort of NIH funding that I've received. And so I wasn't aware of all of the processes and all the deadlines and all the documents which needed to be submitted. And so, I mean, I was very privileged to have a group of individuals that, were familiar with this and were able to guide me through the process. So in terms of the actual would say facilitating of my research and my award, I also feel that my institution, the University of KwaZulu-Natal, has given me an opportunity, in terms of reducing my lecturing load as well. As one of the professors had said, a lot of in Africa, a lot of researchers are lost because they are asked to engage in a lot of teaching, and then they don't have enough time to do research. And so my institution has been very supportive in that sense, as well as trying to facilitate the research, seeing patients and things. They've played a very important role at the academic hospitals as well. So overall, my institution has provided a significant amount of assistance and guidance in this whole process.
Go ahead, Dr. Mormon, and then we'll have to wrap up in a couple minutes.
I just wanted to add the human subject section, which has become a lot more complicated. The NIH actually has a great webinar website that you can just Google and find that tells you what you need to fill out and what you don't need to fill out. If you're not doing a clinical trial, it's much shorter. So I actually learned there was a section I was adding that I didn't really need to add when I watched the video. So look for resources from the NIH. They're up to date and they are really helpful. You don't have to read that huge, PHS that has a bazillion pages. So the NIH actually does try to help you navigate some of these pieces of the grants that are critical, otherwise they get rejected. The other quick thing is somebody just got a grant rejected because they were hyperlinks in the grant. And that was just administratively rejected from somebody at UNC for his K award. And it was just because there was a hyperlink to a website that was in the grant. So there's little things like that that can be really frustrating if you don't read all of the rules that are required for submitting a grant.
Thank you so much. Thanks to all of the speakers from the session. There is one question in the chat, maybe someone can answer that in the chat itself, whether there's resources to guide through the registration process. But I would like to close out this session since we are out of time. And thank you to all of the speakers. So we'll move on now to a wrap-up session. And I'd like to introduce Dr. Jackie Levine, who will be closing out this session. Dr. Levine is the Chief of the Office of Education at the Division of Cancer Epidemiology and Genetics, or DCEG, at the NCI. And in this role, Dr. Levine oversees the division's award-winning fellowship training program. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nas. And thank you to all of you for coming today, and to the Center for Global Health organizers for putting together this terrific inaugural workshop. As Nas said, my name is Jackie Levine, and I'm trained as a cancer researcher, but I spend my days now working with trainees and young cancer researchers like all of you, and really thinking about how to advance their careers in cancer research. And, I've been so impressed by the group that's been here today. It's just amazing to have spent my morning with cancer researchers from all over the world. And I have to say, I particularly enjoyed seeing Dr. Mutale's background this morning. He's in this beautiful setting in Africa, and I wished I was there. As Sudha said earlier, at NCI, we have several hundred visiting scientists from all over the world, and our trainees just keep coming from all over in countries that have different cancer problems than we do in the US. And we just learn so much and really gain a lot from working together. We're really excited to include all of you into our circle of collaborators, fellow learners, and in particular, friends. You are the future of global cancer research, and we are so fortunate to have all of you doing the work that you do. I was really impressed with the great advice shared today. As I said, I really think about the careers of young cancer researchers, and I think the advice that our speakers shared today was just so helpful. Just hearing about the guidance this morning on the panel, and then hearing really great grant writing tips and what types of grants are available to all of you was, I think, just invaluable. It can sometimes be overwhelming to think about where to start, given all this advice. And just remember that you don't have to do it all at once. I recommend kind of a 3-step process, building on some of the things that were said today. Step 1, and I love Dr. Mohamed's advice here, get to know yourself, know your strengths and weaknesses so that you can apply to the opportunities that make the most sense for you, and think about the challenges that you have. Build on your strengths and work with people who have the strengths that you do not have. The second piece of advice I have is build a great mentoring team. And we heard a ton about that today. And peers can be mentors, senior researchers can be mentors, mentors can come from all over the world. And then the final thing, and Dr. Moorman alluded to this, work on developing yourself an individual development plan. And we call those IDPs in the US, and all of our trainees have them. They focus on the trainee's career and scientific goals and how those two things knit together. It's something that you write and you get some feedback on, and you update it every year, share it with your mentors, and really think about the things you're going to focus on in the coming year that really help advance your career, your very unique career. I want to just say that, again, thank you to everyone for coming. You see the scan code on the monitor now. So before you sign off, please do participate in our evaluation survey. We would greatly appreciate your help to improve this meeting for future versions of this workshop. We hope this will be just the first of many. And with that, I want to wish all of you a wonderful rest of the day or night or evening, wherever you are in the world. And thank you again for attending.